On the local level, there will be questions for a lot of you about funding schools, asking you to say yes or no to a tax increase for districts. And dozens of districts are asking for you to improve more money for them because they face budget deficits. This is after the state legislature okayed historic increases in funding last year. Lou's on the show to explain why so many are still in the red. Hi, Lou.
Hi, Jana. 48 school districts statewide have ballot questions, either for referendums, levies, or bonds, several with more than one. And the districts hoping to increase their per-student funding are doing so to try to avoid teacher layoffs.
In a letter to district families and staff addressing significant financial challenges, Minnetonka Superintendent David Law acknowledges he's received questions on what caused this.
Dozens of metro school districts and districts across the state that are in the same spot that we're in. All of us are in this same financial straits. If we're not there this year, they'll be there next year.
That comes as a surprise to many families because in 2023, the Minnesota legislature passed a $2.3 billion increase in public school funding. The phrase fully funded schools was used a lot. And with that big boost in taxpayer money that included free lunches for all students, the question is raised, how can a district like Minnetonka have a $6 million budget deficit? But Superintendent Law says people don't realize there were limitations to that funding increase.
That historic investment in education included some things that doesn't allow us to pay teachers. There was an investment in free lunch for students that was very important for a lot of people across the state, and our families that are receiving that are benefiting from that. Those funding streams don't allow us to pay our operating costs during the school year.
The biggest cost for every school district is the salaries paid to teachers and staff. The 2023 education bill included a one-time 4% increase to the funding formula, followed by a 2% increase the next year. But one thing Law is trying to explain to Minnetonka families is that those percentages did not keep up with inflation.
You know, inflation was higher than 4% during that time, and so it didn't catch up to our costs, and it didn't cover 20 years of underfunding.
Faced with the prospect of laying off teachers and staff, 48 districts across the state this year have questions on their ballots for taxpayers, many of them to decide whether to increase the per-pupil funding amount paid through property taxes. Those ballot questions can be tough asks for people who believe public schools receive enough money from the legislature already. And through prior referendums, some districts, like Minnetonka, have already reached the amount allowed by the state to avoid disparities between public districts. So that's no longer an option.
The majority of our funding is people in front of kids. Over 70% of our funding is teachers. If we have to make a reduction, 70% of that reduction likely will be the people that are in front of teachers serving kids. So we're doing everything we can to avoid that.
With large and small districts facing many of the same funding problems currently, Superintendent Law believes there will be a lot of talk about it at the next legislative session.
So a couple questions to expect concerning education funding at the legislature, of course, is that per student funding number, but also the question of whether the amount that taxpayers and districts are allowed to contribute at the ballot box, they're going to talk about whether to increase the cap, because districts like Minnetonka, as we mentioned there in the story, they're not allowed to do any more referendums because they've reached that cap.
Yeah, and I mean, your story illustrates when you get into the books of it, shall we say, the accounting of running a school district, it is extremely tight and difficult. And I know people think you keep asking for money, but everything keeps getting more expensive, right?
Yeah, and that's really that inflation piece to it. And that goes everything, you know, from transportation and whatnot, but really teachers and salaries, you know, they're not going to bring the salaries down because that's something that's negotiated in their contracts. And so the only thing really that they can do to make the ballot, the budget balance is by laying off, unfortunately.
Complicated issues. Thank you so much. Appreciate it. We'll be right back.